Ladies and gentlemen, once upon a time, as the last century was coming to a close around 1999, there was a country located in the northern part of South America. Let's call it Colombia. And Colombia, for the first time in its national history, was confronting three crises simultaneously. One crisis was economic. The country was entering its third consecutive year of economic recession. And foreign investment was not just departing, it was flooding out of Colombia. And the Colombian business community was thinking extremely short-term in terms of their strategies, as in between now and January. Second, it was confronting a security crisis. Organizations with acronyms like FARC, ELN, or AUC were active, were large, were growing, were bloody, were violent. People in Washington were truly asking themselves around 1999, is it possible the FARC is going to win this thing? Is it possible the FARC is going to be the next government of Colombia? And third, Colombia was confronting a drug crisis. Large, transnational, multi-billion-dollar, vertically integrated organizations had developed such power that they actually represented a threat to the state. And to make that clear, on any given year, they might kill thousands and thousands of innocent people. At one point, making the city of Medellin the bearer of the unfortunate label of the world's most violent city. At the end of the last century, the government of Colombia, which by the way was 2 governments ago, developed its response to these crises. And it came to be called, as most of you are aware, Plan Colombia, or Plan Colombia, as I like to say for the last 13 years, a Colombian plan developed by Colombians to address Colombian problems in Colombia. That said, the government reached out to the entire international community and said, we would like to have support and partners from other governments and organizations and institutions. And I will say to you that while eventually a number of governments and organizations did in fact participate, in the year 2000, I say with some degree of pride, one and only one government stepped up to the plate. And I have the honor and privilege, now that we are not shut down any longer, to both work for and represent that government today. And over the past 12 years, the United States government has in fact provided roughly $8.5 billion to support this Colombian effort to address these crises. And what are the results? Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you that only an idiot or someone who is deaf, dumb, and blind would suggest that there has been no change, no progress between 2000 and 2013 in Colombia. The economy today, let me assure you, is cooking. You wish to visit Bogota, Cartagena, Medellin, or Cali, you had better be ready to duck, bob, and weave from the construction cranes that are building new buildings, new businesses, new offices throughout the country. Foreign direct investment is not just coming in, it is pouring in. And in 1999, when the Colombian government was worried that within a year or two, it would become a net petroleum importer, Colombia is today exporting more hydrocarbons than it ever has in its history, including, I might add, to its neighbor to the east and the north, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Today, unlike in 1999, when 10% of the municipal governments of Colombia did not have a resident mayor because he or she was fearful that he or she would be assassinated or killed by the FARC, by the ELN, or by the AUC if they had stayed in their town. Today, 100% of the municipalities have a resident mayor. The AUC, the paramilitary organization, has been demobilized. The FARC's total operational strength is less than half of what it was in 1999. It is seriously decapitated in terms of its leadership. Homicides and kidnappings are not just down, they're down dramatically. Coca cultivation, cocaine production is down by some estimates as much as 60%. And the other non-measurables, things like tourism, nightlife, student activism, the sort of things that suggest a society and a community that is feeling more comfortable with where it is visible to the naked eye of anyone who chooses to visit Colombia today. What I see, ladies and gentlemen, is a nation whose population today is far more confident about the future than they were 13 years ago. And that finally brings us, most people say, about time, to the theme of today's brief presentation. And that is, if that is the new Colombia, what is its role, its impact on the Western Hemisphere for the years that come? My starting point, ladies and gentlemen, is that the Colombia of 2013 is a very different country from the Colombia of 1970 to 2000. Of course, I hereby acknowledge, as would El Excelentísimo Dr. Cuellar, there are remaining problems and issues to address. There are hundreds of thousands of internally displaced persons. Some would suggest millions. I do not. The FARC has not disappeared, and in fact is attempting to become even more relevant with acts of violence. Drugs have not disappeared from Colombia, and while those huge multinational organizations have been eliminated, smaller drug organizations still exist. Some economists criticize income distribution in Colombia, although I might add, they're making the same criticisms about income distribution in the United States of America. My point is not that all problems and challenges have disappeared, but rather the Colombia that we see today in 2013 and can expect to deal with for the next 40 or 50 years is confident, sees a leadership role for itself in the region in the years ahead, believes that it has the ability to focus now on issues other than its domestic and internal crises, and has both the resources and the capabilities to export elsewhere in the region and in the world. So if I am right, if this is the definition of the new Colombia of the 21st century, how should that manifest itself to those of us gathered here today in the Union Club in Philadelphia? I will offer 6 observations and then stop. First, Colombia is going to be an economic player of considerable importance in the years ahead. Colombia, more than almost any other nation in the hemisphere, including ourselves, has signed up to free trade agreements with the United States, with Canada, with the European Union, with a number of other countries in Latin America. Colombia is participating in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Colombia is a founding member and leader of the Pacific Alliance that links together those countries of Latin America, led principally by Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Colombia in a unified vision in terms of trade and commerce. Colombia is a business and economic regional hub, to a very considerable extent, the beneficiary of being in a neighborhood where many international businesses have chosen to leave their previous hub, and I will not identify that country, and not wanting to leave the region altogether, have reestablished themselves in Colombia. Second observation, we should expect a Colombia that is more assertive of its own position, both regionally, in the hemisphere, and globally, whether in the regional bodies such as the OAS or the global bodies such as the United Nations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes this is going to be a good thing when we happen to agree with their position. Sometimes it's going to be a bad thing when we don't agree with their position. I don't take a view on that. All I say is it is inevitable as a government and a nation that becomes increasingly comfortable and increasingly confident with its place in the world is going to assert its views in a more emphatic manner. A third observation, we should expect to see Colombia as an international partner. Now, I obviously speak from the U.S. side, but I believe there are another dozen or so nations that could make the same point. I would offer you the following simple fact. Today, in Central America, in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic, in Peru, in Paraguay, the Colombian security forces, principally the national police, are doing more training, more engaging, more capacity building than any other nation on the planet. And that would include, by the way, ours. And I not only expect that to continue, I think that's a very good thing. At the end of the day, it is good for the country that receives the training and the capacity building. Quite frankly, it is good for the United States of America because we do have limits in terms of just how many places we can offer this sort of training and engagement. And quite frankly, I believe it is consistent with a Colombian vision of greater regional leadership in the hemisphere. Fourth observation, Colombia's pursuit of peace, which to a very considerable extent can be summarized by four letters, F-A-R-C, or FARC, is going to continue. The 45, 46, 47 million citizens of Colombia have every right in the world to expect eventually peace throughout their sovereign territory. And whether they get there by force of arms, or by negotiation, or by political process, it is going to continue the effort, and you and every other member of this hemisphere should take that into account as you calculate and think how you will engage with the Republic of Colombia in the years ahead. Fifth observation, and I've been selling this line, Alfonso, really since I first got to Colombia in 2007, expect to see Colombia exploiting a certain geographic advantage tied to the resources that they have. Colombia is the only country in all of South America which has a Pacific coast and an Atlantic coast, and rather robust ports on each of those two coasts. This gives them a certain inherent advantage in the region. The fact that attached to that is great mineral wealth and great hydrocarbon wealth makes some economists and some business leaders' eyes glow with the satisfaction of possible business and profits to be made in the future. And sixth and final observation, regional leadership. Traditionally, when you study those countries that have exercised leadership beyond their borders, you see three common factors that lead to them being able to take this position. One is they are democratic. Non-democratic governments rarely exercise leadership. Second, they are stable. Governments come and go through a constitutional, predictable, political process that allows one government to evolve naturally into the next without completely trashing everything that the predecessor had done as the new one comes to office. And third, they have institutions that actually work. Police and armed forces, courts, all the institutions of a functioning state. Ladies and gentlemen, I do see that in Colombia. And what that suggests to me is that to the traditional toilet that we have looked at in terms of exercising leadership in Latin America in the years past, Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, at a minimum, expect to add a fourth in Colombia, and perhaps for another lunch, we would determine and discuss whether we should delete another of those to keep it at the three. But this is not the time or the place to have that conversation. This is the time and the place to say to each and every one of you, ladies and gentlemen, if I had $1 billion and a spare $100 million that I could invest somewhere overseas, I gotta tell you, I'd be thinking very seriously about Colombia. My sense is the 21st century is going to be a mighty fine century for the Republic of Colombia.